On today's episode of the podcast, I sit down with founder of Humble Grape, James Dawson. We, of course, discuss his origin story and transition from finance into running Humble Grape. We talk sources of funding and why they settled on a crowd-funded model. We talk experience and embedding an experience-led culture in your business. Talk hospitality as a career. And look ahead to the opening of their 5th site in Canary Wharf. Enjoy.
Yeah, so I fell in love with wine when I was living in Paris. A friend of mine's dad was a chef and used to cook tiny little dishes and pair them with lots of different wines, and it was the whole wine and food thing became very exciting for me. So I got into it, and then while I was living in Paris, I was there for almost 2.5 years. I would rent an old car, drive to a wine region like Rhone Valley, Bordeaux, whatever, and then Loire Valley, start just tasting the wines and just really getting into it. And then my wife and I were lying on a beach on holiday in 2009, and we were discussing what I should do business-wise because I wanted to get out of the city. And we came up with a business plan to do some wine stuff. And the original business plan was to buy an old chateau in France, turn it into a boutique hotel, have some vines, all that kind of stuff. But I very quickly realized that was a terrible idea, and it would take 20-30 years to take off. But I still really loved wine, so I bought 10 cases of wine from an importer, and I started just doing wine tastings to kind of get my network, like come to a wine tasting, learn about French wine, and then guys are like, oh, we love that Rhone Valley, can we buy some from you? I'm like, oh yeah, I've got a few bottles. So then I started selling the wine. Then I needed to deliver it, so I was delivering it on my motorcycle on my way to work in the morning, and then on the way back in the evening, and then eventually after a year of doing that, I hired an operations guy, and then we started importing our own stuff. And then for a long while we thought we would do online and selling to restaurants, and then we realized that was a terrible idea because our wines are very kind of niche, boutique, small family production, organic, biodynamic wines, and you can't sell those to restaurants. They don't need them. Restaurants need cheap wines or very well branded wines that anyone can sell or that the wine list can sell on its own. Our brands are quite boutique, craft, esoteric kind of wines. And then when the penny dropped to me that I needed this business to be an experience business rather than a product business, because a product trades as a commodity and it's all about price and volume, and we're not that at all. So it needs to be an experience business, and the only way to curate an experience is to have your own space. I went against every single professor in my MBA who said, like, don't ever have big fixed costs, don't have rent, everything's going online, it needs to be scalable, and fixed premises are not scalable. And we went against that because we needed to create the experience, to have our own wine bars, to sell our own wines that we imported. So in 2014, I did a fundraising on Cedars, the equity crowdfunding platform, and we raised just over £500,000, and the purpose of that was to open our first wine bar. So we opened the first one in Battersea in 2015, so it was like July 2015. Within 6 months, we were rated the number 1 restaurant in London out of 20,000 on TripAdvisor, and we were doing toasted sandwiches and cheese platters and meat platters. The service was very good, and the wines were excellent, and the fit out was great. And then from then it became easier because then we got offered this site. This is our second site. So the one we're at is St. Bride's, so close to St. Paul's, next to St. Bride's Cathedral. And we just went from strength to strength, and then our revenues grew and our volumes grew. We started importing more wines. We did another big raise for about 1.3 million in 2017. After St. Bride's had been open for a year, we raised almost 1.3 million on crowdfunding, and we used that to open our 3rd site in Islington and our 4th site at Liverpool Street. All wine bars with a retail concept inside, and then great food to accompany the wines, all kind of naturally selected and that kind of stuff. And now we've just completed our 3rd round of financing on Cedars. In March 2019, we raised 650k, and we're going to use that to open our 5th and largest site in Canary Wharf, and that's going to be opening in July this year. So that's kind of a very quick snapshot on how we got here.
So yeah, I think firstly, congratulations, because that's, I think, no mean feat in this kind of environment. Which I'm sure there were lots of other challenges along the way, which you may well talk about a little bit later. But I think the thing that's really standing out to me is the funding element here. That I've come across. There may be others that I've interviewed, but to my knowledge, I've only actually ever come across one other person in the wine space who's done crowdfunding. That's Mel down at the New Zealand cellar. I know that she used that as her sort of initial boost to open that site down there. So I just invite you to kind of almost draw the lines between those three stages, and maybe bringing out parts of the story along. Why crowdfunding, why not, which of course comes with why not other sources of funding, but then also, kind of maybe a little bit beyond that, like why and how do you think you've been so successful at doing that kind of time and time again now?
Good question. So when you're a startup and your goal is to have heavy fixed costs and spend money on setting up a building to turn it into a wine bar or restaurant, the banks are extremely reluctant to lend you any money. At that stage, we were a startup. In 2014, we were turning over about 300k. We needed to spend about somewhere between 250 and 400 to set up our first site. Banks are not super interested in lending you any money, and you either have to go and find financing yourself or fund it from profitability. Funding from profitability means it's gonna take you 4 or 5 years to save the money. So if you need to scale, you need to do it a little quicker. So back in 2014, I was the European CEO of a fintech called OpenFin, and I was based in Level 39 in Canary Wharf, and I met loads of startups and loads of people in the startup space, and crowdfunding was very new. And I met one of the first employees of Cedars and had the conversation with them, and got really excited about crowdfunding, because I had a network of people that would be interested in investing, but not at very high kind of levels. So maybe, a couple of thousand, and you could quickly do the maths that if you put a bunch of them together, you can reach a big number very quickly. But the thing that always put me off was all the legals and all the paperwork and all the stuff you have to do at Company House and all the share issuance and all that kind of stuff. Now, the crowdfunding platform takes care of that for you. So all you have to worry about is the marketing and the sales side. You have to be able to sell your business. So when you're first trying to raise money, if you've got a network of friends and family that you can get some money off, and then you can expand that into your network of customers, and especially if you're a B2C business, crowdfunding is very good because you're raising money, but you're also curating customers that'll be loyal customers long term, because if they're shareholders, they want to look after you and you look after them, vice versa. So it works really well. So the first round was really a bunch of people in my network that believed in me as a person and that were willing to back my idea. And then once we got that off the ground, the second round was a much bigger round, because then we had a couple of £1 million worth of revenue, a much bigger business, 2 physical sites that you can see, and then again it's marketing to your existing client base, of which there are thousands already. And then this last round that we did now was really pretty straightforward. The business is much bigger, it's quite successful. We've been the top ranked bar in London, number 1 and 2 for like months and months and like years. We were in the top 10 of all restaurants in London for the last 2-3 years, 2 of our sites. So there's a lot of credibility behind what we're doing, and the investors will hear about us, and if they've been before, they'll go, yeah, Humble Grape's great, and they'll invest, or they'll come in and they'll have a great experience and then they'll invest. And we work extremely hard on making sure that customer satisfaction and service and all of that kind of stuff is excellent.
Self-confess, I'm not an expert in how crowdfunding works, but the ones that I often come across, they don't have to give away equity, do they? I mean, I do often see people putting up crowdfunding appeals, and they may be giving away prizes, or they may be giving away experiences versus equity. And I'm just curious to see, do you think that's part of the success or not really?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So just a quick summary on crowdfunding. There's product crowdfunding where, for example, I want to design a new pair of sunglasses, but I haven't designed them yet, so I'm going to sell 1,000 pairs of sunglasses at £200 a pair before they've even been built. So I'll get the money in, I'll use the money for the production line, I'll go and have them built, and then I'll deliver them to the customer at the end. But some of that product crowdfunding can purely be like, if I'm doing a movie, I'll put your name on at the end. It doesn't cost me anything, and you're kind of part of something. So that's kind of product crowdfunding, and you've got Kickstarter and Indiegogo that do that kind of stuff. Then you've got debt crowdfunding, where you just get debt. So you take on a loan from a bunch of private individuals, and you pay them an interest rate usually much higher than the banks, so somewhere between 5 and 15%. And you can also do that and then you get equity crowdfunding, so where you're giving away a share in your business. Now, if people are excited about the potential for your business and they love the concept and they think it has growth, then buying equity is very interesting for them, because not only are they buying into a product and a brand that they love, but if that brand is successful, then they can commercially gain from that significantly, as opposed to if you just give me 50 grand and I give you 10%, then the max you're going to make on that is your 10% back. But there's a lot of risk that you can lose the money as well. And then and also a very interesting thing in the crowdfunding space is the government incentives for EIS and SEIS. So if you're a brand new business under a year old and you do crowdfunding or any kind of investment, investors get 50% tax back on their investment. Put 10 grand in, get 5 back in taxes immediately. With EIS, which is where we are because we were a more established business, someone investing 10 grand immediately gets 3 grand back in their next tax bill. So it's quite interesting from an upside perspective. Even if the investment stays flat and you cash out a few years later, you still make 3 grand on a 10 grand investment. You don't get that like from debt and stuff like that. So equity is interesting, and equity is also interesting because of the network that I had that were people in the city, people in the kind of fintech space and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and it's the first time that I've really covered financing and crowdfunding to that sort of level here. So I'm very pleased to be sharing that. Something else just from that origin story as well, just stood out before we kind of get on to the business as it is now. Was just from the start you were talking about curating experiences, and I don't have a specific question, but I wonder if you just sort of unpick that, because it seemed to be that was equally as important as getting the money in as well.
Yes. So experiences are of huge value to human beings. If you think about even questions that people pose to people on their deathbeds, when you think back one day when you're dying, what is it that you valued in your life? It's not that new car you bought when you were 25, or the house you lived in, or the jewelry you had, all that kind of stuff. It's not that. It's the experiences you had, the travel you did, and the human interaction and connection you had. That's very important. And experience in our world, especially when it comes to retail, or when it comes to something like a wine bar or a restaurant, experience is very, very important. You are going there for the experience, or you would stay at home. The experience has to be phenomenal. It has to be welcoming. It has to be unique. It has to be warm. It has to be different. It has to be interesting. If it's not, you either do it all at home or you can do it online. Like if you're going to have a transactional experience buying a bottle of wine on a price point, it's much easier and quicker to do that online. If you want to have a human interaction experience with someone in one of our sites where you can talk about the wine and you can browse the wines and feel them and taste them and get the stories of all the vineyards and everything, then that's an experience that's worth a lot more than the price of the bottle of the wine. If you see where I'm going with that. So in the modern world where Amazon is annihilating the retailers, everything's going online, and you've got Deliveroo and like all these services that'll take the restaurant actual food package to your house. If you're not strong on the experience front, with delivering an authentic, real, interesting experience in your locations, then you're not going to go very far. So experience is key to everything, and experience is the quality of the wines have to be exceptional. Their stories have to be interesting. The food has to be exceptional. The food has to be curated properly. The service you get from the staff at Humble Grape has to be excellent. It has to be authentic, unique, differentiated, and powerful and warm and connected. Otherwise, you can just do that at home. And that's what I mean by experience. And once you've kind of spent a lot of time working on that differentiates Humble Grape from other businesses who we compete with.
And yeah, it feels like we're at a really interesting time because you have, in a sense, managed to scale up that experience and, running successfully across 4 different sites now and about to sort of go into your 5th and, all of the challenges that come along with that, the training, the design and, all those good things. And I'm just curious, the question that's coming to my mind is how do you plumb in those experiences and almost, looking at the back end, looking at like the infrastructure of the company, I guess maybe what some people might call culture. But yeah, how do you keep that experience consistent and how do you keep it at that high level? Again, looking more at the back end of the operations and now you've got your team and you've got the people around you. Just talk a bit about that.
Yeah, very very good question. The culture is key. So when we hire people, especially people who are going to be on the floor talking to customers, they have to be passionate about wine and service, like really passionate about it. And we managed to attract and retain staff really well here because people who join us really love wine. They love the fact that we've got over 450 wines that we import directly ourselves from vineyards. We don't buy from agents and other suppliers in the UK. And they're really into that, and that connects them to the vineyards. And they also, the staff connect to the vineyards because the winemakers and or the owners of the vineyards will do Skype training and in-person training with the staff every month. So when you've got someone standing at your table talking to you about Blackwater Sauvignon Blanc, the staff member has heard that from the winemaker. Not from me, not from some sales guy at Bibendum. It's directly from the winemaker, and no one else does that. So staff training, making sure that if they're interested in furthering themselves, that we fund their WSETs, giving them training every day before they start a shift, and then training them once a week with our specials. We've got 2 specialist in-house wine trainers who train the staff on all the lists of wine by the glass, all the stories of the producers and all that kind of stuff. It keeps things exciting and fresh for the team, and it also makes it curates the experience really really well, and it just makes it very very obvious when a customer comes through the door that Humble Grape is all about wine. There's a lot of other brands that have started off very successfully saying that they're wine bars and then end up becoming huge restaurants. We don't want to do that. We want to stay like in the wine front. And we don't want to be a chain. We want to be a wine group with a collection of wine bars, all very different, serving different needs for different customers in different locations, but still maintaining a sense of authenticity and focusing on that experience that we spoke about.
That's super interesting to me that you have really used technology to bring the vineyard kind of in. It's of course it's not the same as going around and going down and in there, but if you've got wines from South Africa and New Zealand and you've got a team of how many people, you can't be flying them over to New Zealand every week just because you've got a new wine on by the glass. So I like that. I think it seems like a sensible way to, again, just make sure that those experiences are there and not necessarily relying on the person coming over once a year or twice a year, and actually, being a little bit more proactive and bringing those experiences in, which, again, it might, to some people, it might sort of take the romance out of it, but it's always coming through the filter of the individual, of the person standing at the table, sitting at the table, however they're interacting. So I think that is really the kind of the filter that almost brings those stories to life. So yeah, really interesting.
So other ways we plumb the culture in is that the team do go on wine trips. So we've just come back from Pro Wine. We were there for 3 days. Pro Wine, for people who don't know, if you can imagine 18 football pitches full of tables of guys from all over the world. I mean, over 30 countries showing their wine. It's a fabulous event. It's the biggest wine fair in the world. And you can go and taste thousands and thousands of wines there. So when you go there, you have to be very focused. And you have to choose regions, wines, stuff. If you're just wandering around aimlessly, you can get lost. And you can physically get lost at Pro Wine. So I took 4 of the team over, and our goal was to find some new modern Eastern European wines, which we did, from Hungary, Serbia, Slovenia, We also found a few interesting bits and pieces from all over the place, but that was really the purpose, to get something that was really interesting on the Wine by the Glass list that people hadn't had before. And that really invigorates the team, because even though we only took 4 people over, 2 of them were our trainers and other people who are like really, and they come back and they tell the stories of all the wines, and then everyone gets very excited. So we do that kind of stuff. We're doing a trip to Portugal to meet 2 of our suppliers in September. And last February we went to Germany to meet our German producer Von Winning, and we had 10 of the team there. And just spend 2 days in the cellars with them. It's really, going back to the crowdfunding, if your business is well financed and it's growing profitably, you can afford to forsake profitability and try and build the brand. And especially like when you have an owner like myself who still works part-time in other fields. So I don't put financial pressure on the business. It allows us to focus on quality and brand. And that just gets the staff really engaged. Also, in our industry, which is quite rare, we always pay the best wages we can. Everyone's on a pension. Everyone has holiday pay, sick pay, all that kind of stuff, which you take for granted in most industries. But a lot of people in our industry are still on 0 hours and contracts with no holidays and all that kind of stuff. And we pay for training and all that. And, it ends up costing more in the short run, but our staff retention and everything is great because people feel like they're cared and looked after.
One of the other things that I've sort of picked up on with a lot of the, to me, the more kind of progressive businesses has been trying to make kind of hospitality, or getting people to see and them seeing it themselves, hospitality as a career. And I'm not sure if if you're still a very young business, have you looked at that and thought about that as career development, keeping these guys?
Yes, that's a very good question. Can you make hospitality a career? So I would say yes. In the UK, it's difficult because most people with the UK background don't tend to go into hospitality unless there's nowhere else will have them. Whereas the Europeans have a strong culture of going into hospitality. So I think that's quite an interesting question. But if you're a young person now, and you're looking to pick up a lot of skills in a lot of different areas like business management, customer management, sales, marketing, actually being at the forefront, like hospitality is actually somewhere where you can learn quite a lot very quickly. And even being on a floor for a couple of years, you meet lots of interesting people with lots of different skill sets. It could be a stepping stone to go somewhere else. But in the modern world, where businesses like Humble Grape actually give equity to most of our staff, it becomes something a lot more interesting, because even though people don't get paid that much in the hospitality industry, if you're part of a modern, dynamic, growing business like Humble Grape, and we have an exit in a few years' time and staff get paid out some equity, then that becomes quite interesting. I think in the past, hospitality was very much like people who loved it but ended up having to work 70-hour work weeks for a very small salary for years and years of their lives, and then never go anywhere financially. I think those days are over. And my advice to people looking for starting in this industry is look for a progressive company that has staff right at the top of their list of priorities, and that knows that a happy team delivers excellent quality experience to their customers, because that's the only way to do it, and that looks after their team and wants to grow in a modern way and is willing to give away equity to people who are performing well in their business.
Yeah, last question, and because I'm in a greedy mood, I'll sort of blend a load of different things together and see kind of how they land. Because one of the things I did want to ask you about was events. To me, I guess the kind of the creative challenge would be to already being in a space where you've got this experience theme running through. how do you then create high points within that are worth people, spending more for, really, and investing more time for that? And I wonder if the best way to kind of bring all those together is to ask you about that in the context of the place you're about to open, and give you the chance to sort of, talk about anything else that's going to be coming through once Canary Wharf comes online.
Okay. So that's a good question. Two questions there: Canary Wharf coming online, and how do we use events to curate an interesting wine experience? So, in my mind, an event or a creation of a time set piece of activity for clients is really interesting. One of the cool things we do is everyone that books at Humble Grape has the opportunity to have a wine flight delivered to their table before dinner, during dinner, and a wine flight could be discover the Loire Valley, have some two glasses of white Sancerre, Pouilly-Fumé, and a Chinon and a Bourgogne. So you've got Cab Franc and the Sauvignon Blancs that are very well known in the Loire Valley, and that kind of gives people a little experience with dinner. Maybe they don't want a full wine tasting or someone standing at their table, but they get to experience a little mini wine tasting and a bit of education, and it kind of adds value to their dinner. All the way through to big wine tastings where we teach people about, say for example, come and have a wine tasting with us and we'll teach you the difference between all types of sparkling wine. We'll teach you the difference between Prosecco, Cava, Champagne, Cremant de Bourgogne, Loire, all that kind of stuff. Or learn about Burgundy or Bordeaux or the Loire Valley or the Rhone Valley or South Africa or Australia, New Zealand, California, whatever, that kind of stuff. So those kind of wine tastings, we do that a lot. Not so much because it's interesting from a revenue perspective, but because it really reinforces the brand is about wine, and it makes customers excited about us. So, and that brings us to Canary Wharf. Our new Canary Wharf site is opening in July, and it's a great location for us because there's no other wine brands there, and there's no one who focuses on the experience. Everyone seems pretty old school product. And we just really want to go in there and focus on the experience and deliver very high quality food, very high quality wine experiences to people who are in desperate need of something like this in Canary Wharf. So it's quite a big site. We're going to have a private dining room where we can do like private dinners with winemakers and stuff like that. And then we'll have an event space where we can do big wine tastings with a big screen and, teach people about wine and stuff. And then a big restaurant section with a huge outside area. So we're very excited for Canary Wharf. It's our biggest project to date. It's also very scary. It's going to cost a lot of money to open, and it has to be built on time, otherwise things get very sticky. So it's quite stressful, but we're very excited, and I've got a great team working with me on it, so I'm confident we're going to get it done.
Thank you so much, James. It was a real pleasure meeting you. As I mentioned on the podcast itself, it's a real pleasure to be able to bring information around funding sources to the wider community and to my listeners. And I think the way that Humble Grape has been able to grow so quickly and sustainably will provide a lot of food for thought for people who are in the space. Do please check out Humble Grape's website and main social media handles below. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, then do please click subscribe wherever you're listening. And of course, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.